So first thing we want to, as Anna said, we want to start a conversation. If nothing else, we really do want to have those open and honest conversations. Like we want to sit down and have a conversation and say, what does the student really need? What is it they cannot accomplish because of their disability? That I think is just a great, easy way to look at that. What can't they accomplish because of their disability? Is it they can't turn pages in a book? Is it they can't access a worksheet? What is it? And is the student encountering, what are those barriers that they have to learning? Is it that they can't hold a pencil? What is it? Is it a thing or is it a device? And at the IEP meeting, or are you thinking about, let's review their performance? I've had students in the past who we knew that they were very, very intelligent, but they just couldn't get their information out the way that the other teachers wanted it. So there was this huge difference between what they were able to perform and what they were able to actually put together and put into a format that the teachers were looking for. Does that hopefully make sense to people? So you want to be able to ask those kind of questions, start those conversations, because that will help us figure out on the next slide as to who can make up this assistive technology team.
All right, so you'll see, we talked earlier about there being AT team members that can be in the home, the school, and the community. Oftentimes when we think we're in the school setting, we think about only the people that are present in the school setting, but it's so much more than that for students. You'll see in the home environment, right? We can have everyone from a guardian to a grandparent that might have childcare support a student, to siblings. Sometimes siblings are even in school buildings with students and maybe a great resource or connection. Other relatives. You'll see we put student there. We're going to go back to that again. In the school, there's everything from classroom teachers to related service providers, special ed assistants. We forget that the special ed assistants are the paraprofessionals. They're huge assets to gathering information about who the child is and what things the child can or can't do, and what do they need support with. And you'll also see administrators. When you go through the quiet indicators and throughout our time with the AT Forward project, we're going to be bringing that up more, but administrators are huge advocates, not only for helping us learn about that, but also just thinking about them as the allocation of resources and helping educate them on what that is. And then the community, and I see that Laura Plummer graciously offered some other ideas in the community one that we missed, so we will definitely add more here. But private therapies, outside assessments, some of you are working with CASC or the Wiseman Center, Talk to Me Now Technologies, IL centers, ADRCs, and other community-based organizations. So it's really important to have a really global understanding of all the different environments that a student may be in and how all of those intermingle to help to figure out what a student might need in the school setting. So the next slide is going to be pretty obvious. But what do you notice about the team? If I remembered to do this before our meeting, it would have flown in as there's a student, right? The student is this primary focus when we're talking about the team. And what are we doing and offering to help support our student with getting the needs that they have and getting those needs met in terms of assistive technology. So next slide. So gathering student input. As we go through today and as we're talking, we came up with a few of these resources that are here, but this is not the total list that can be out there. Many of you might have resources, so I encourage you to share some of those resources. In the next slide we will, and we can annotate, you can share them in the chat. But a couple of these resources we did want to point out is, hey, can I try that? So Tracy, if you wouldn't mind clicking on that. Thank you. And this is an older resource, but it's a really great handbook to use with students for just talking through some of the questions that might help you organize your thoughts with students. So going through that as you, it's a lot of pages, so we won't go through the whole thing, but as you scroll through it, and it'll just give you some ideas of how to engage a student within a conversation about what things support them and what things might be difficult for them. So having those conversations with students and giving you some conversation starters. And then the next resources, which through AT Forward. If you've been here before, you most likely are aware of all of this. If you have not, check this website out. Lots of great resources, including the decision-making guide to help you organize your thoughts with students and figure out some of the questions that might be popping up. And then, of course, the SET framework. And it goes without saying, in memory of Joy Zabala, who has created this, there are so many beautiful resources on this website. And you can download a lot of her resources as well. Those are available for all. And that framework in general, thinking about the student, the environment, the tasks, and the tools that might be available, it's a great framework to just help those conversations move forward in multiple settings. So when you're thinking about the student and the environment, think about that environment in multiple places. Yes, where it might be school focused at one point in time, but it doesn't mean that the home and the community aren't impacting that student support. So just really keep in mind that SET framework as a huge resource and tool. All right, I will keep track of this. And then Kathy, I will add to this, but if people want to annotate even on here, so if you click on the very top where it says view options, you can click on annotate. You're welcome to draw, stamp, you can text and create text on the screen. You could also just add to the chat, or if you want to unmic and you want to share something with us, but other ways that you've engaged students in sharing input on the AT process. We'd love to hear from you.
And as people are starting to kind of think about this and maybe adding some things, think about, what is a kid nowadays carry in their pocket all the time, with their cell phones and things. Sometimes if we can connect kids to technology that they're used to all the time, like, for example, I had a student who was, he had a very difficult time. He was very dysgraphic, so he couldn't write what was on the board and get it down on his paper. So of course his homework never got turned in, but he did carry a cell phone. So instead of him being angry all the time, I'm like, so what could we do? And I said, we talked about his cell phone, but getting him to kind of come up with those ideas, I think, was paramount in this. And as he became a strong member of this assistive tech team, because he's like, yeah, I could take a picture of that. And he goes, and then I have it for later. So it's like, great. So we found a way to get him engaged by using the technology that he had in his pocket. I'm unable to see the screen. So could you tell me what else is on there?
Yeah, so we have people in the chat that are just mentioning the CAST website. People have used WADI, people have used SET framework. It sounds like SET framework's kind of the winning tool that a lot of people are using. And I think it's because it's very user-friendly and it really helps us think through like all the different aspects so that we might need to think about. So even using that as a guiding resource with outside organizations in the home and the community, it's a very useful tool. But we added some other ones, social media, videos. I added your thoughts, Kathy, about cell phones, using the technology that they already have at their fingertips and helping show how that can be used as a tool in their own to expand what they're already working on.
So this is a case study that we put out there because we want to kind of talk to you again, and we want people to unmute and either put things in the chat or chit chat, because we do want this to be an open environment. So this is a third grader, and it is kind of based on a student that I had who had attended the same school since kindergarten, and I think that that's an important fact for you to remember. He is in, in grade K through 1. All the teachers said he was very bright, was eager to learn. However, Paul just couldn't seem to learn to read. No matter what we did, he couldn't get it. In the third grade, he only could tell us the names of 15 letters. And of course, everybody wanted to say, let's go back and let's just keep hitting letters. But he couldn't even often produce those letters in text of his own. They were backwards, upside down, or they didn't even resemble a letter. He had a slight speech impairment. We did do some weekly RTI services for him. So, but now that he's in third grade, we're nearing that end of teaching him to read anymore. So his teacher this year decided we needed to refer him for some special education services. So as a group, and like I said, unmute yourself or whatever, let's talk about who should be on this team and what should we be looking at. So let's hear from everybody.
Kathy, we do have somebody in the chat who is saying parent, general education teacher, possible reading interventionist. And then somebody else mentions the student, an OT, and an SLP.
Ooh, those are some good ones. A student in SLP, OT, yeah. Anybody think maybe we need to bring in a vision person? We don't know. There's some things that we just don't know about him. He's been in the same school. And if you think about it as a kindergartner, you know, print is larger, things like that, maybe bolder. Maybe there is something going on with his vision, what we don't know about. He is very bright, like we said. Those are great things. The parent, for sure. The general ed teacher, absolutely. That general ed teacher needs to be there because they're seeing how he's being able to produce work. And I think some key things in here are that the teacher said that he was very bright, and he was extremely bright, but he couldn't come up with how to produce those letters. That was for sure. That was way out in left field. And again, his speech impairment, I'm so glad that somebody thought about the SLP, because we need to look at whether or not that speech impairment might be affecting other things. I will tell you as we're going through this, that we ended up putting in, looking at a hearing specialist, because we weren't 100% sure if he was hearing all of the sounds. We also went ahead and got a vision specialist in there. We did do some vision tracking with him, and just to see how he was tracking print, if he was able to track print. And we found out that there were lots of things that we didn't know. And also at home, his parent was telling us, and his grandparent actually came to the meeting, his parent and grandparent. And the grandparent said, you know, when I try to play catch with him, he can't seem to catch a ball. And all of a sudden we started thinking of other things. And then they found out that Paul had absolutely no vision in one eye. Now, isn't that just a strange thing? But we had always just thought, everybody said, well, he's a clumsy kid. He didn't, you know, he participated in gym and did really well with some of the activities. But when it came to things like eye and hand coordination, he always seemed a bit off. And come to find out, he had absolutely no vision in one eye. And by this time, it was very difficult for us to correct it. So, you know, in the end, it was like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't think we're ever going to know. But we ended up needing to put on some hearing services. He did have his hearing checked, and he had some low end frequency issues that we needed to figure out ways to improve, that he actually received all the sound he needed. We also needed to look at that vision piece. You know, it really didn't seem to affect his ability to track print, but it certainly did have difficulty with him being able to throw or toss a ball or make or hit a target. That was for sure. It also had some difficulties when he came to filling out worksheets and things like that. So this kind of snowballed as it went on, but if we wouldn't have had all of those people in place, we would never have gotten to the place that we needed to help the student achieve the best that he could. So we really had to make sure we had all of those people at the table. We had to make sure that everyone had an equal voice and have that shared vision, that really what we wanted to do is help Paul move forward in his reading. So we needed to find out what all was going on. And the OT definitely told us that he was extremely dysgraphic, that no matter what, we shouldn't have him trying to copy letters or having to reproduce letters at this point in time. Anyone else have anything they want to add to our case study, or thoughts or questions?
I want everyone to guess, when did I learn to read? Because I feel that as important part of this story, the regular teacher felt that he needed to be reading.
Oh, good point. Anybody have any? I have no idea. Anyone have a guess as to when Mike first started to learn to read?
High school.
Oh,
High school.
that is interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Mike. It's interesting because this young man that I talked about, he actually didn't start to learn to read till he was towards the end of middle school. So he was like eighth grader. So, yeah, but it doesn't mean that, and you raise a really good point, Mike, is that it didn't mean that his learning stopped. And that's where I think assistive technology is such an important part of this, because he needed to, even though he wasn't reading on his own, we still needed to get information into him. So that's that accommodation piece versus that remediation piece. Thank you so much for sharing. Anna?
Yeah. The next example probably leads a little bit into what Mike was just sharing as well, but John's a 4th grade student, uses an eye gaze system to communicate. He'd like to be able to access literacy materials to engage in conversations with classmates about books they're reading. So back to that literacy piece, and I think Mike made a huge point when he says that, you know, in high school is when he learned to read, and how do we capture and get that student involvement in the AT evaluation and the assessment early on, so we can find out the best way to provide some assistive technology. So this is a twofold question, thinking about not only the people who would maybe be involved, but potentially how you would involve the student in this process as well. So feel free to share in the chat. Oh, go ahead. I just add one of the questions about involving, who would you involve in John's AT team in the chat? But I also just want to note, somebody mentioned Bookshare as a resource for this student. And I think that's a great point made, is that Bookshare is a huge resource for students with print-related disabilities. And although we're not really going to solutions and ideas in this, and the whole point of this presentation, but I think that the idea of thinking about Bookshare for students at younger levels is huge. Because it has so many resources and so many alternative options for students to engage. So yes, Bookshare is a great tool to think about. SLP, vision, teacher, parent involved in the AT evaluation for John. And even thinking about using Jen earlier when she said Bookshare, but even using Bookshare as a resource to see what he does or doesn't like with Bookshare, what his preferences are, how he accesses the material, just showing him what it can look like in different formats is a great tool to assess. And more people ideas, library media specialists, great. So many people can use their LMTSs in their school districts. We have a lot of resources. I don't know if some of you use Sora in your district, but we have Sora for audiobooks in Madison schools, but that's a great resource that a lot of times the library media specialist can help you engage with and use.
Epic is another really good one.
Mm-hmm. I love Barbara's idea of giving him questions ahead of time to think about an answer. So knowing that a student might use an alternative device to communicate, giving them a heads up of what kinds of things you're looking for, or asking about, giving that time, putting students on the spot. We know that it's not always giving them the most time to really process and think. So a student and their family questions ahead of time so they can share them with you at in whatever format works best. That's a great idea.
I really like that idea. And I want to add to that, where I've been in IEP meetings where there is a language barrier. We have a translator there, but even still, I think it's very difficult. Giving those questions ahead of time, I think, is just an outstanding kind of thing. So starting those conversations early and to have that ability to have it translated or whatever. And sometimes, think about it, that our translations didn't always match. Like we talked about OGCOM system for a student, and even though it translated, the kind of looked at us and cocked her head, and she had no idea what we were talking about. So that is just a fabulous idea, giving things ahead of time. And like Anna just said, we don't want to put kids on the spot, if we can at all help that. That's an awesome thought.
I think sometimes people oftentimes they go into an IEP meeting thinking they have to have all these answers in place and have to have the solutions ready to go to put in an IEP. And a lot of times as part of the AT team, this is such a fluid process. There's exploration that needs to happen. So like Kathy mentioned earlier, when we're thinking about the AT team, we're not only just thinking about the tools and the devices, but we're thinking about the services and the different people on the team that have the knowledge that can be part of that resource to help support you with thinking about how to make the most benefit for that student. So definitely think outside the box in that term, in that sense of, maybe you're exploring Bookshare still, or maybe you haven't figured out that exact format that's going to work yet, and not eliminating it just because an IEP meeting is coming and you have a deadline. There's no deadline when it comes to continuing exploration of AT and finding the match that works best for students.